Thank you all for coming. Thank you very much for doing that. I'm Sam Palafian, and this is happening in a huge way tonight because we're on banddirector.com, and there's expected more than 20,000 people that just went live on a camera that's looking at us from the table back there. So it's a shot. It's, don't turn around. Don't make it too obvious.
Act natural.
But so we're in a situation tonight where we'll do a lot of questions that you can ask the composers, and you might be handed a microphone to do that, or at the end I might come up to you and ask you to come with me. We're going to go back to ask the question back in a control room back there where he has a better environment. So just be ready, to make this work. There's an archive after it's over. And so they take about 10 days to make a better production out of it, and then that goes up there forever. And that's at banddirector.com. So thank you all for coming and think about what you're hearing, and if you have any questions about that, okay? So this is a composer's forum, and I think is this the second time today that you sat down as a group? There was one earlier. This is the third time today. So we're going to have an open mic forum and have people talk, and I've had a couple of questions at the website that happened in the last 24 hours. But the first one was, why this concert? And why is there a concert of all premieres happening tonight? Any ideas? Well, I got an answer from our conductor. He said that eventually everyone here recommended each other. And that's how this evening happened. That was networked by the composers without knowing it. And so that was a cool thing, to find out that there was a through line. And the other question that was the most asked question was process. And I think we're all hearing about that a lot. The making of things is really popular right now. So I would ask any of you to start talking about process. And the biggest question was time of day that you work most efficiently.
Time of day, there is no consistent time of day for me, but I do need a block of a few days to really get anything done. So I'll sort of disappear from the world, not look at email, and sort of first part of the day is spent kind of getting focused and getting my head into what needs to be written, and then once I'm writing, then it just sort of keeps going, and till I get really tired, like 2 days, 3 days later. And then I will reemerge and answer all the emails and, be human again. But I found that I really need that block of time to really, to get an amount of work done that feels sufficient for, for a larger process.
Like David, I prefer big blocks of time as well. Like a few days is ideal. When I was younger, I used to be a lot more of a night owl and stay up till 2 or whatever working, and now I'm definitely more of a daytime worker. But big blocks are great to have time to really stew in an idea. I mean, I think we probably would all agree that when we're working on something, we're thinking about it most of the time, even if we're doing other stuff. But the opportunity to have, free brain space to really work out an idea is ideal for me, definitely.
In my advanced age, I have, even though I'm advanced in age, I have 2 little kids, and since having my first child 7 years ago, almost 7 years ago, I've had to learn to give up big blocks of time, which I also prefer, and now a lot of my work is in 20-minute increments. If now that they're in school, I have big blocks of time again. But it was really helpful to develop a sort of a skill for taking advantage of any little time where a baby nodded off to sleep. And so I would think about what I was working on, all the time, be mulling it over, and then I'd say, oh, Jasper's asleep. I've got, a half an hour, and what will I do? I will tweak that oboe line that I wrote 2 hours ago, or I'll just set myself with a very precise, exact task, and since now I do have more blocks of time, that strategy still pays off to really think about what am I going to do at this session. Whereas before I had kids, yes, I would wallow in big blocks of time. It was great, but I wasn't as efficient as I am now.
Thanks. I am definitely a night person, is the short answer when it comes to creativity. The longer answer is that I find that there's some tasks that I do really, really well in the morning. Usually things that involve like rationality, focus, be really crisp. So I'll usually start the day by doing emails or doing things like looking at parts and correcting them and making sure they're all great. But I find that I don't really get to the point where I'm brainstorming and coming up with really original ideas until at least like 8 p.m. I don't know why, but there's always been something for me about the feeling of the rest of the world shutting down and being able just to kind of inhabit this after hours time in which everything's off the clock. I see a lot of composers derive a lot of energy from a certain kind of subtle pressure, and I find that usually when my plate is clean, I feel the freest to kind of explore in ways without restrictions. And I definitely feel very similar to David in terms of I need to disappear and withdraw and get in the zone, or I can't dig very deep. I think most of my pieces are written in a couple blocks of a week or a little bit longer, with spaces between to reflect.
Thank you for that. And it's Dan Visconti over there, for those of you who haven't made one of the forums yet today. Stephen Mackey, Alex Gardner, and David T. Little. So we're going to have that pause all day. We found out there's another David Little composer he told us about. That's important to know. There's another angle to the same question, which is this particular piece that's being played tonight for all four of you. Was that done in a single project, the way Dan described, for all of you, or was there a piece that you were working on at the same time? There were some questions about that. This is the opposite. This is cool.
Sure. Well, that was fun. Well, you know, mine was kind of written with a hiatus. I wrote the first version of it in kind of one fell swoop, and then I had a period where I tried out some things and wrote another piece, and it allowed me to kind of disengage from that moment and then come back and look at it more critically. I find that myself, oftentimes, the creative building in the sandbox process needs to be separate from the process of looking at that and criticizing, and if I try to do both at once, I find that I'm just shooting down all my ideas, because most ideas seem pretty silly unless you realize them and see what they can actually do in the context of a piece. So.
Yeah, I agree with that, and find myself over the years developing more separation between the kind of brainstorming and just kind of mad scientists trying to get stuff out there and then sitting back. So my piece tonight and most of my music started with an intense period, and I got into the piece. I started to know what the piece was about. I also remember talking about time of day. There was one particular night when I woke up after going to bed, and I woke up again a little after midnight and ended up working all night and getting just sort of a certain trajectory in my mind, and that enabled me to just put it aside, and I worked on another piece and came back to it and found that, yeah, I don't need this, or yeah, this is more important, and like Dan said, sort of having some time away where every little nugget of my imagination isn't the most important thing in the world. When you're writing, it's like, oh yeah, you know, and especially if you have to work hard to get something, and you stand back from it for a couple of weeks, and you realize, yeah, that's not, you know, it's not so important.
I wrote, I got this piece to about 90% done, and then sent it to Damon. And while I was waiting for him to look at it, you know, he and I ended up having a pretty close, you know, collaboration about it. I wrote another piece in that time, so I had some time away from it by the time I got it back, and then knowing that there were going to be tweaks that needed to happen, and then I just completed it, and it was nice to have that time away from it to sort of free my head from the instrumentation and everything, and then come back with fresh eyes and make whatever changes needed to happen.
So this piece was written pretty much in one arc, start to finish. It's in 3 movements. I just sort of started with first movement, second movement, third movement, wrote it straight through. And there weren't other pieces going on at the time. However, I had just finished a very large percussion quartet, and I think that influenced what this piece became, because that piece it's percussion quartet and electronics. It's very, very dark, very kind of a heavy piece, has a lot of heavy metal influence in it. And this piece, I think I needed a break from that. So this piece is actually much lighter in some ways and has a much sort of brighter energy to it. So I think, having the opportunity to write this gave me a break from the sort of emotional space of that other darker piece.
Yeah, you see the lines, the idea of getting back and getting some perspective is why I think we get that many questions. There's a lot of people out there trying to create, and they see an evening like this as a big opportunity, especially we've published the schedule, and it's a real residency, to see you collaborating with the student body and classes gives them an opportunity to ask questions they've always wanted to ask, and this is very good. How about you in our live audience? So there are people that are thinking of questions, and I'll throw this out a couple of times. Is this like Ferris Bueller? Anyone? Okay. Well, I'll go to the next published one, which is that the idea of writing for wind ensemble. Is this new for tonight's concert? Is this a new medium for you? Is this a place where you've dwelled before? I'm going to go this direction.
So I've written one wind ensemble piece called East Coast Attitude, but this piece tonight is actually a transcription by Alan Johnson, who's in the audience, of a piece originally for a chamber orchestra. So this is a sort of interesting experience for both of us, because it's the first time I've had a piece transcribed, and it's the first time that he was saying earlier today, it's the first time he's done a transcription where the composer was then there at the rehearsals. So it's been really fun to collaborate on it, and but I think it's a great ensemble, and we were saying earlier, I would love to write another piece that I think would be very different from East Coast Attitude, which is now almost 10 years old.
This is actually, this is my first band piece. I was telling everyone that growing up I went to a really small school, and then I went to a really small college where there was not enough people to support a band, so it wasn't really part of my experience, and so I've come to it as an adult through friends who are in armed forces bands and things, and it's a really wonderful ensemble, and there's so many colors and everything available. So when the opportunity came up, I was like, and I'm also a percussionist, so when the opportunity came up, I thought, oh yeah, saxophone's more percussion, yes please, let's do it.
This is my first band piece, wind ensemble piece, and I don't know why I waited this long to do it. I mean, it's right up my alley. And I've known it would be up my alley for a few years, and it took a while to get all the pieces in place. But like Alex said, I mean, you've got this huge color palette. I've written a lot for percussion too, and just sort of the inclusiveness. I mean, and basically I'd ask Damon, well, could I have this? Yeah, whatever it is, whatever you need. And can I have 5 percussionists? Yeah, sure, fine. And yeah, given that kind of commitment to realize a composer's vision, absolutely makes me want to do it again.
Thanks. Yeah, this was as well my first piece for band, and just as Steve mentioned, it's great not only to get some extra instruments, but also things like springs, whoopee cushions, rubber balloons. There's all kinds of crazy things in my piece that I was very surprised that Damon allowed through, but it's really indicative of this really wonderful and outgoing world, and we've all had such a wonderful time at the rehearsal recently, just seeing the kind of enthusiasm and support for the musicians. So I think just as much as the incredible palette of using these sounds that are often kind of subsumed under a pad of strings in the orchestra, it's also a really wonderful culture that I think is really rewarding, especially to composers that are new to it.
This is now coming from me, having read about all of you for about 2 weeks and getting these questions to come in. Dan, did you decide that the certain instruments that will be stirred into the performance tonight would be assigned to the standard instruments because of the personality that it takes to play like a bassoon or a tuba. They should get a glass and a spoon. Or did you think that through? Is that how this happened?
Did I think that through? That's always the question with me. But thanks. I think that was definitely part of it. I tried to pair instruments that at least had some of the same kind of gestural impulses and personalities. Sometimes it was just practical about, who was free to hit something based on what had to happen in the traditional instruments. So there were a lot of different things that went into it. But I have to give a big shout out to Paul Scheffel, who was basically managing all of the junk items in this piece, which is kind of like being a roadie for a band that doesn't exist. So
Right.
that was a really big part of it, having his work on the ground here.
That's awesome for Paul. There's one part of that, which is the noisemakers, the New Year's Eve noisemakers.
Yes.
They're in the hands of people that can't be heard at the loudest points of wind ensemble concerts, in the loudest tooties. But they're dominant in the funk band. And the other thing I wanted to tell you was that growing up, we were not, I grew up in a large Armenian family with my uncle's large Armenian family exactly next door. So there were 13 kids. And we were all made to play in band. But when we came back from band class, it wasn't about practicing instruments in elementary band and middle school band. We had this kitchen band that was set up in the backyard. There was a shed, and it was all the used and not for food anymore, but all the used kitchen equipment was our band. Didn't matter what our chosen instrument was. We never played it in the backyard. But that exact same primitive impulse to call it ourselves a band and function in some way was there among the 13 of us, and that's how we started getting connected. So when I read this, it was like, wait a minute, this guy see me? Was he ever in Miami?
Definitely did the same thing. That's actually not in the same circumstances, but when I was a real little kid, the earliest music that I made was just finding things around the house. And I think that I've always had an impulse as a composer to explore the physical range of what instruments can do. And sometimes that is really dipping into wonderful sounds that are inobvious or not currently part of the repertoire. So taking a clarinet and looking at every sound that it can make is not that different for me than looking at a jar full of coins and all the different ways it could be shaken. And it was really fun and satisfying to compose a piece that tapped into that early childhood impulse that got me interested in music in the first place.
That's awesome. The Stephen Mackey, the guitar, is huge in your life, and it's a doorway and a portal for you. But the idea of some of the things that a guitar does that some people think are annoyances, like, the lightsaber and the sounds of the 60 cycle hum and the feedbacks and those kind of things are looming large with you, in your music. And this ohm, when I saw the word ohm, I had a lot of, electrical engineering, before I was busted down into tuba major. And I thought that's what we were looking at, but then it was, I started reading on, and this idea of the sounds, the indigenous sounds of an electric guitar being used by you and considered by you, that's just awesome. It's every angle, every facet of where you come from might show up in a piece.
Yeah, absolutely. There's been a kind of a feedback in the early days. The feedback was, influence from the guitar to my written music, and that's what you're talking about here. Just sort of the zip, zip, as you get the cable close to the jack input, and then you put a delay pedal on that and get all those things. Absolutely are just sort of part of my sound world. But in the last decade or so, it's sort of gone the other way, where writing for orchestra has really influenced my guitar playing, and have a more orchestral concept of the guitar, and try to orchestrate the guitar with the technology to give it the kind of big palette we're talking about that a band has. And I'm sure I'll be stealing some stuff, from this piece into my guitar world, which, as I said in the beginning of my career, didn't happen. It was all one way from guitar to written music.
Wow, it's fascinating. The percussion life that you've had, did it run concurrently with your composition life? And have you, when you were young, you wanted to create music, and your principal instrument was percussion, or was there a moment when you were going to be just a phenomenal percussionist?
No, no. I actually grew up studying piano, and then in college, when I got to college, I thought it would be really great to hit things, so I switched to percussion, and it was really great. But we all knew that I was not going to be a performer, so composing was always more attractive to me. But I do love percussion. I used to play in a salsa band, and I studied for a long time lots of different kinds of percussion. So it's definitely part of my experience. But yeah, nobody wants me to play for them now.
I see. There's an interesting question that came because of percussion is throughout the concert. I mean, guest artists and 5 percussionists in the back going crazy in pieces. But the idea of your perspective as a percussionist, as you study other people's music or experience it, it comes with a lot of rests. And so one of the emails that came in was from a percussionist who's learning how to create music and enjoys the time in the hall when they're not playing, when they have they specifically said 457 bars rest is a lot of time to learn about the counterpoint of a piece when you don't have any assignment. So I never thought about that. As a tuba player, we sit in the back, we hide behind the tuba so we can talk to each other and not be seen. But I could see the percussionists having a great angle on this.
I wish that percussionist I wish I had known that person so they could have told me that when I was playing in the orchestra, squirming in my seat waiting for the 450.
Here it comes, here it comes. Oh, there it went. We know that one, yeah. And percussion for you is, I did an interview that will be played at intermission today with Third Coast Percussion, and they fell in love with your music before this piece because of the quartet. And there was a collaboration with New World Symphony, percussion section, so that they saw you coming for a while in their lives.
Well, so this 30-minute piece that I wrote, Haunt of Last Nightfall, was commissioned by Third Coast, and that was developed over a number of years, very close collaboration with them. And then the original version of this was commissioned by New World Symphony, and the commission just happened to come right as I was finishing that piece, but also as a good friend, Joel Puckett, who's I think very known in the wind ensemble world. He and his wife had their first child, Evelyn, of Evelyn's Lullaby, and so this piece is actually dedicated to Evelyn and sort of in celebration of her birth, and also as a sort of a cigar to Joel as a new parent. And it's sort of about, as I was telling to the band yesterday, I don't have any kids, so I have a cat. So that was the closest I could get to really understanding parenthood. But I tried to do my best with it, and yeah.
That's interesting. That family has run through some of these conversations already. But that idea of thinking that you have everything worked out with your schedule, and then having even a cat will do it.
Oh, yeah.
But when children come, it's an incredible thing. I remember seeing Glenn Close doing a television interview, and she said she hadn't been asleep for about 24 hours because she was a new parent, and was amazed by what she could do, what she thought was impossible before. But when faced with the situation, it's time to be creative and still remember the script and get in front of a camera. But that idea was prevalent in the communications that we got from the site about how people work and times of day. And it's because we're all doing life. And how life influences how we work is amazing. How about you in our audience? Have we kicked off? Yes, sir. No, that's... Oh, got it. So as a band director, you're asking the question, when you were in a group and you were sitting there counting the rest like we were just talking about, what made you decide to become a creator of music, and who inspired you to keep going. More important than anything else, I think.
Somebody told me to quit, give it up, and that's what inspired me to keep going, actually. I was an electric guitar player, and I heard concert music for the first time in college, and I thought, that's what I should be doing. Eureka. Nobody ever read that job description to me before. And I thought you could be a rock star or a doctor or a lawyer. That was kind of it. And wow, you can be a composer, and people actually sit and listen to it. And this, music is, is dark and light, and the whole world is in it. And I decided right then and there, I'm going to be a composer. And I went to the head of the music department, and I said, I want to, be a music major and be a composer. And he said, well, we'll have you, what instrument do you play? I said, I play the guitar. He said, well, we'll have you sight read a few things and then play some prepared pieces. And I said, well, I don't know how to read music. And he said, he literally laughed and said, yeah, there's just no chance. So I was, driven to prove him wrong.
My answer is that nobody told me I couldn't. So I just kept going, and still nobody said, no, you can't. So yeah, that's basically, once I realized that I could make my own, that was great. And there was, there were supportive people around me, fortunately, at the early time. So yeah, there was no negativity around it.
I grew up playing in a fife and drum corps, and so I learned almost entirely by rote and by ear. And so when I then went into my middle school and high school band, I didn't really know how to read music, but I could play really well. And so I just started making up the parts that I would like get the snare drum part, but then not play it and just make up something cooler. And the band director was like, yeah, he was very encouraging, actually. He loved chaos. Like, the band room was like, you know that you've been in this band room. It's like madness, right? And this was part of the chaos that was really great for me, because I wasn't writing anything down, but I was making things up. I was inventing music from a fairly early age, and then I discovered, that being a composer was something you could do, sort of like what Steve was saying. For me, it was through film music, and then I just was hooked and obsessed. And from film music, went to Stravinsky, went to Webern, and then it's just been a giant black hole ever since. But a happy black hole.
I was a violinist before I was a composer, and not a particularly good one. And I think one of those moments of realization for me was I was always getting yelled at in my lessons at the Cleveland Institute of Music because I was like playing different Mozart violin concerti, and I would just come up with different cadences for all these little sections that were basically very similar, and getting yelled at. And I started to realize that my own impulse with music about what I had to contribute was more about shaping and planning and figuring out what music would be performed more than actually bringing it to life. And, I didn't really get a whole lot of energy about performing on stage, but I got a lot of energy from working with performers and imagining what they would do and thinking through those situations. So it was actually kind of through realizing I wasn't suited for one thing that I realized composing was really where it's at for me.
Thanks for that. Incredible. It's great that you sit in the band room and you think, geez, I hope I didn't tell somebody that that's ridiculous. And they're the next, But there's one thing that you need to know that that happened in my band room, which is that the band director would sit there, and this is about the composer who's not here. The fifth piece is written by David Stock. So this was in Pittsburgh. And he had clinicians come in all the time. And so I was already out of college, but I came back to visit a middle school band room. And the clinician was David Stock, who's one of the composers of tonight's, and he's recently passed away. And he was there to explain what modern music was to a middle school band, because we're going to play a couple of pieces for contests that are brand new, and this is what you need to know about that. So what he did that day was have everybody listen in layers. He would play the piece and he'd say, everybody listen to the recording and only listen to the flutes. And then I remember him when it was done, and I'm watching the middle school kids, and he said, that was easy, wasn't it? They were all felt that it was easy. Okay, let's try to find this instrument. Play the bass clarinet. So the bass clarinet player plays a couple of notes, and then he says, try to find the bass clarinet all the way through this time. You know, and the people were raising their hand when they could hear it and put it down when it went away. And they decided to keep those ideas going in that band room with my old middle school band director. And they became much, much better because of listening assignments. Today, it can be done, you know, with social media, or there's a way we can commonly listen to music. It wasn't easy then. We had to do lunch in the band room. And the guided listening was done while everybody was munching on their lunch. You know, and so the idea of listening more closely was introduced by David Stock, one of tonight's composers. And you know, he was also a great friend of the Empire Brass. I was a founding member of that, to keep the fire burning about commissions and new music and why it was important, and to innovate is everything. And he was an amazing crusader. And at times he was like Don Quixote. And I do know the first time I ever heard your name was from him. And so I think you had an inspiration from him as well. Is that?
Well, I met David at the premiere of his third symphony with the Williamsport Symphony when I was a student at Susquehanna University, and then years later was commissioned by the Pittsburgh New Music Ensemble. And really, they gave me an opportunity to write what was the largest piece of mine to date. It was the first opera I'd ever written, and really, that opportunity really changed my life in a lot of ways. So, you know, both for the kindness that he showed me as a student who was just sort of bugging him after a premiere of his symphony, and then for just the work he did for the community in establishing this ensemble and encouraging commissions. It's been really important to me.
So that's what happens when you ask a question, you know. Thank you for tying up some things. Another question? Another idea that comes from? Yes, ma'am.
I think there's a lot of pressure for young people in music to have this notion of achieving or succeeding to a certain degree, especially at a young age. So I was wondering if you could offer some words of whether or not that was true for you, and if not, in my experience, I found that it's more often not that people achieve success or have, you know, some pivotal moment in their younger years, as to like how you dealt with that struggle and that like impending failure doom as a young
Failure Doom, she said. That's the name of a new piece, probably.
Well, there was a good deal of failure doom for me, which is like totally my new favorite word. But I think maybe the best thing I can say about that is that one of the things that I've been happiest about going forward in my career is that what I've defined as achievement or success has definitely changed. And I think when I was younger, I didn't really know a lot about what I wanted. I was still learning this, so really understanding what kind of composer I was or what kind of situations I wanted, those were still becoming clear. So, you know, a lot of the things I considered achievement at the time were things that other people considered achievement. You know, if you got your music performed widely, or if you got recognition, you know, through some other kind of way. But I think more recently, I started to realize that those kinds of recognition are ultimately really, really hollow, and that they rely on so much on the external world, and they're wonderful if they're there. But for me personally, I realized that my own feelings of achievement, based on I was able to accomplish a difficult task that I wasn't sure I could, I was able to handle a situation at a performance and speak well and excite people in the audience. I started to find a lot more inspiration came from satisfying what interested me, and also reaching out to other people and finding ways to support them. And I've come to realize that that's really the greatest kind of achievement, to be able to allow other people to feel like they could do what they appreciate in you. And I often try to spread that as much as I can.
We have a couple thoughts spew out here. One was, wanted to say that my father was in the military for years, and then worked for the government at civil service. Retired from the military, then became civil service. Very sort of traditional American, you know, a lot of things that, you know, Mackies aren't quitters, and a lot of angst about me making a living. Yet at the same time, he also said, you know, Steve, if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. And so the kind of mixed messages, you know, we're really worried, clearly worried about what I was going to do with my life, being interested in music, but also this, this kind of almost vicarious thrill that I might do something that I love doing every day, which he didn't have in his life. I mean, he worked a regular job. But I really appreciate the fact that, you know, at a certain point when I switched majors from physics to music, well, I really went down. I started out pre-med, then I went to physics, then I went to music, you know, and I was really kind of worried, what's he going to say? And that's when he said, if you love what you do, and he said, you know, you can do whatever you want as long as you try your hardest. And that combined with my own naivete about this, like I said, I didn't know anything about the concert music world. And the rock music world is not about achievement. You know, the rock music world is about doing. The rock music is about, you know, being with, you know, your friends and being loud, maybe. You know, there's just no achievement is not part of it. There's no awards. You won the Pulitzer Prize for Garage Band. I mean, it's just not part of the culture. So coming to concert music, I see that in a lot of my students, and I see the kind of pressures you're talking about, and I wish I could, you know, sprinkle some dust, you know, fairy dust, and give them the kind of complete ignorance that I had. You know, I would just, sure, I can be a composer even though I don't know how to read music. You know, and when I was in music theory classes, asked to write a minuet, I thought that was composing. You know, I'm expressing my soul with this little minuet. You know, I didn't realize that this is just an exercise and it has nothing to do with really being a composer. I hate to even say that because I don't want other students to feel that way. But yeah, I mean, you know, the most important thing you could do. All those things add up to me really not questioning it, being naive, being ignorant, and if you can hang in there, that's the greatest success. If you can continue to do, you know, what you love to do, that is, you know, the greatest success. Even if you can't make a living at it, right? I mean, Charles Ives was an insurance man. And if you can kind of support your habit as a whatever it is, you know, that's a success right there. But if making a living doing that is important, you'd be surprised at how many people drop out, you know? Now, we're talking about, you know, we're not talking about being, you know, a world famous solo violinist playing with major orchestras around the globe. That's a special kind of thing, right? You know, that's like being the shortstop for the Yankees. I mean, you're not, you know, not everybody's going to have a chance. But there is a lot of niches you can fill as a musician if you love it and work hard at it and don't give up.
I think that the kind of achievement and success that you're talking about is so ephemeral. You know, it's here 1 minute and gone the next. And I think we've all met composers who have achieved those things, like awards, what have you, throughout their lives. And a lot of them are still not very happy people. So like Steve, I feel lucky that I was kind of ignorant of those things when I was very young and when I started, so I wasn't really worried about them. And by the time I realized that that was something I had defined for myself, what my own sense of success and achievement would be, so it wasn't a big idea. But also we were talking about earlier today that, you know, tenacity is such a big part of our jobs. You know, there's a lot of, what was it, failure, doom, failure thing. There's a lot behind everything that we do, but is it really failure and doom? It's just, you have to keep doing your thing. I always think about two things, a quote from Joan Tower that I love, and she says, you know, I don't think awards make a career, I think that music makes a career. And also that I've asked myself through the years, if you know, there's times when we all feel frustrated. I've asked myself if there were no reward, no commission, no nothing associated with this project, would I keep doing it? And if the answer is yes, then that's all I need.
I just want to add one thing that Alex reminded me of. I got early in my career a terrible, terrible review like, this is a bad idea done badly. The only good thing about being at this concert was the satisfaction of knowing this will never happen again. And I mean, that's kind of what the review said. I talked to a friend, collaborator, and he told me about he said, well, about the Tai Chi master. And the student asked the master, but master, you never fall, you never trip. And the master says, oh, I fall and I trip all the time, but I get up so fast, you don't notice. And that's been very helpful for me. Yeah.
I think for me, starting out, I actually had this sort of healthy combination of totally insane but very practical. So I was trying to do work that was kind of out there, and I had this insane theater piece as an undergrad that had like 50 actors that would all die in the aisle of the auditorium, and people in the audience had to like walk over their dead bodies to leave the thing, and it was great. It was really fantastic. It was all about Bill Clinton, actually. No joke, totally true. But then at the same time, knowing that I felt like I was really starting late, and I also couldn't read music, like Steve was saying, and so I said, okay, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna put everything I have into this, and when I'm 30, I'm gonna assess. And if I'm 30 and it's not happening, then I'll go back to school or I'll do something else. And it was cool to like reach 30 and be like, oh, I can keep doing this. I feel like I'm at a place where it's like things are good. Things are where I'm happy where they are at 30. And for me, having that kind of built-in out allowed me to just barrel forward and be totally insane leading up to 30. So it helped with the doom failure.
This is awesome. The idea of, when we're going to be done is going to be tempered by the fact that there's a lot of people dressed like penguins in the audience. And so we want to make sure that you have enough time to warm up so that all this talk about these people's music will be rewarded with a great performance because we get a chance to warm up. So we'll let you go early, just so you know, so we can stay here together and not have you feel like you're stuck. I've been watching, nobody's going like this yet, so we're in pretty good shape with the performers. But thank you, performers, for coming here, because to put a face and a personality to the music you've been working on for months, literally months, is really invigorating. It becomes human. And I'd like to ask if there are any more questions coming from the audience. Yes, sir.
Well, I remember when I was an undergraduate, and the same person who told me to give up composing also did a really good service. I was in the music theory class that he was teaching, and he took me aside and said, by that point he'd forgotten he told me to give up, because I went away for a while and came back. With an operation, completely different phase. No, but he took me aside and said, you're really doing well in this class. Would you like to do an independent project with me, an independent study next term? Instead of taking this theory class, why don't you do an independent study in composition with me? I'd be happy to teach you. And he did, and I wrote a piece and then conducted it. And I remember going to the first rehearsal. I'm going to conduct my own piece. Barely knew how to compose, definitely didn't know how to conduct, but just, hit that first downbeat and the first sounds, I was like, yes, this is the right job for me. I mean, they may have been in all the wrong notes, but just, that it happened was just so exciting. When I hear, and again, talking about failure, doom, and success, when I hear about other people's success, if I go to a cocktail party and, won the Nobel Prize, a lot of people get, it's all bragging about his Nobel Prize, or he's all bragging that he made $100 million last year. None of that ever makes me feel jealous or inadequate. I go, yeah, but can he or she write music? That is, and if they can write music, I say, well, can they write my music? No. So yeah, there's just that hearing your own sound. It's amazing.
Okay. Wow, that was cool. I think for me, it might seem like a little thing now, but the first time that I had a performance of a piece of music outside of the auspices of school, and I was a student at the Cleveland Institute of Music at the time, and this was just something with a string quartet over at the Museum of Art, but there was something so different about it that it wasn't just an audience populated by my peers and professors and people that were predisposed, or as Steve often says, were being paid to like my music and to support that, which is a wonderful thing too. But there was a real excitement about seeing people come in who didn't know what to expect, and they were there because they were curious, and they had no idea what to expect, especially because it was like the second piece I ever wrote. So they didn't have any context to even know what it might sound like. And there's something about that, the connection with just average people who are coming to discover music and see what it was. It was so exciting, and I wanted to interact in that world more. And I think that was really exhilarating to me.
I find it still pretty overwhelming to hear something for the first time. And it's sort of like what you're saying. It's like you hear yourself in sound. It's pretty cool. So yeah, I don't know what else to say, but it's a pretty consistent thing the first time I hear a piece, as long as it works. If it doesn't work, I'm like, oh God. But when it works, you're just like, it's the most exciting thing.
Yeah, it's really, I can't think of a more sort of amazing, magical experience to hear a large ensemble piece come to life for the first time. And it's also really humbling because you realize that all of these people are playing, what you've made. And it's just amazing to see this group, making it happen. It's funny, I was very aware during this piece more than other large ensemble pieces of the like weird inefficiency of writing a huge score with a lot of moving parts and then breaking up all the moving parts into little parts for all, for individuals, and then they have to do all this work to put it back together into its original form. It's like this really weird game of telephone, but it's beautiful and wonderful, and yeah, there's nothing better.
One more question? Maybe not. Oh, go ahead.
That exact problem every time. I said, no, but yeah, you bring up a really great point. Sometimes there's pieces that I've written that I feel so proud of and so passionate, and other people don't like them very much. Or there's some pieces, strangely, that I've not been happy with, and other people find things and they say, I just love this piece. And I used to have this weird reaction where I'd say, oh, no, you're wrong. It's not good. And I realized that, it's almost like having a child in a sense. And I haven't done that. So, those that have can tell me if I'm wrong. But there was something where I realized that I didn't have the right to determine that being's fate once it was out. And I also realized, too, that I loved all my children, even the ones that came out a little strange and stumpy-legged. So.
I have one piece where someone, after it had been played for years, came up to me and said, you quote The Sound of Music in that, right? And I was like, no, I totally don't. And I totally do. And I'm like, and it's like one of those things, if you listen to it just the right way, it's like The Hills Are Alive, and you're like, oh, crap, but not intentional.
Yeah, it's happened, like little tiny things like that once before, and yeah, it's disturbing when you realize.
I have a lot of friends who aren't musicians at all and have no interest in contemporary music, and they often hear my piece and they say, yeah, it sounds like a horror movie soundtrack. And I think, really? Still? After I'm going for joyous and uplifting, and you're still hearing, Dark Night of the Dead? Man,
Well, thank you very much for attending this get-together, was what it turned out to be. It's like we're sitting in Barcelona having coffee and olives or whatever they do there these days, and they're sitting around talking, and it all comes to life in 30 minutes. We're at half hour. So those of you who have the penguin suits on, have a great time warming up, and those of you in the audience, you got to start thinking about where's the best seat in the house to listen to this. And for those of you in the audience, that's live, you need to know that there's a wonderful interview with Third Coast Percussion that will go into the webcast, and one with Damon Talley, the conductor of all the music tonight. So if you wait 3 or 4 days, these are put up as archives, and they last forever. So if you go to banddirector.com and look up the date, December 3rd, you'll be able to see those interviews too. So thank you for coming to the live one, and the fun starts in 30 minutes. So we'll see you in a little while up on the stage. Thank you so much for your thoughts.